This is a recording of a lecture on content analysis. Content analysis is a research method. Three things. It counts something. The something is about the content of a media product or products. So this is content analysis as applied to media objects, things like journalistic articles. Content analysis is a type of quantitative analysis. It's a quantitative research method, and it's called that because it involves counting things. Some research methods are quantitative, but others are qualitative. A qualitative research method would make judgments about the quality, the attributes of something. In other words, some aspect of saying how beautiful something is, how intuitive something is, how let's say how biased something is, for example. So an example of content analysis. What we could do is we could count the number of articles in two different newspapers over the period of a month that mention Brexit. And we could count the number of articles that mentioned it in a positive way, then in a negative way, and then in a neutral way. So as a result of that, we would get the idea of how a newspaper covered Brexit, or two newspapers. So we could say that one newspaper, let's say for example the Times, was positive about Brexit, and we could find another newspaper, the Guardian, that was negative about it. And this would allow us to try to decide the question perhaps of whether the media was positive about Brexit or negative about Brexit. So that's content analysis as a quantitative side, but we could look at Brexit in an alternative way, or we could have some additional research in addition to the content analysis. We could use a qualitative method, and examples of that include an interview or a participant observer method. And using an interview, we might interview the editor and journalists on the newspaper to find out how they chose what stories to cover, the sources they used in their stories, and their choice of lead. Or we could observe the editor and journalists at work and try and find out as they went along what they were doing. So why content analysis? Well, content analysis is good when you've got lots of data. And when you're dealing with the mass media, you're often dealing with many articles, a large number of media products. Now, if there are only a few things to analyse, that lends itself to qualitative analysis. So, for example, if you're looking at Leonardo da Vinci paintings, there are not a great number, so you'd be very critical in detail of how Da Vinci did his paintings. The analysis of technique, the analysis of colour, the analysis of materials, the analysis of subject matter, etc. But if you were looking at a year's set of newspapers, or even a week of YouTube videos, then you'd need something that was faster. You'd need something that could cover a lot of data fairly quickly, and for that sort of thing you'd use something like content analysis. Why does being faster important? Well, obviously practically you've got to get through the problem, but it allows you to look at more. And so that means that the objects you're analysing are probably going to be more representative than if you just looked at one or two articles. Those one or two articles could be unusual, might not be representative of what the newspaper did, what the website did, they might not allow you to understand editorial policy or standard. But if you looked at a lot of articles, you could get a much more representative overall picture. So for example, if you wanted to find out about the representation of women in business, you could find one article that takes the issue seriously, covers it well. But if you use content analysis to look at all the articles for a year, maybe it's different. Maybe you could see that that one article is not representative. So why is being representative important? Well, it allows you to compare various media, publications, news channels, blogs, to make a real comparison between how different media cover things. You can see how things change over time. You can break things into month, for example, and you can come to a better understanding sometimes of how a story is covered. You can come to a more accurate understanding than simply reading a few articles. Okay, so what does quantitative analysis require? Well, even though content analysis is a quantitative method, that doesn't mean there aren't any qualitative aspects. So yes, you've got to count things, but when you count things, you must decide what it is. You must make some judgment about the quality of something that puts it in category. So take our example, counting articles to find out how many are pro-Brexit, how many are anti-Brexit, how many are neutral on the issue. If you want to put something in box A, box B or box C, you've got to categorize each article. You've got to make a decision about whether it belongs in box A, B or C. It doesn't just say that at the top of the article, this is pro-Brexit, this is anti-Brexit, this is neutral. You have to read it quickly and make a judgment, a qualitative judgment, to make this decision. And you might develop some criteria that allows you to make that decision, a set of rules about the quality that makes a decision. So for example, say there's an article that makes 2 pro-Brexit points and 1 anti-Brexit point. Does that make it neutral, or does that make it pro-Brexit? Or do we read from an overall sense of whether it's pro, anti or neutral? So it could be the anti-Brexit point is the main point and the 2 pro-Brexit points are used, but then they're quite weak. So overall the article might be anti-Brexit even if it raises 2 pro points and 1 anti. So you've got to make a decision about the rules for putting things in different criteria, in different categories, sorry. Right, so just to repeat this, you're counting, that's quantitative, but you must make judgments of quality nonetheless. You must categorise it. Let's give an example. The Scottish referendum, there are lots of articles about that. If you're doing a content analysis, you might add up the number of articles that were for a yes vote and articles that were for a no vote. Some articles might have arguments for a yes and arguments for a no. Some are predominantly yes, with a proviso that argued no. In other words, yes, we think Scotland should be independent, but if the economy doesn't improve, maybe we should change our minds. In other words, you have to try and make it clear exactly what you are counting and why. The judgment for the criteria for judging an article or media products one way or the other. All right, about these criteria, you should specify clear criteria and be very explicit about what you're looking for, what the rules you're using to decide whether a category A or B or C. And these rules are not just something that you leave in your head, you write them down. They become part of the methodology of your research, and you should try and justify these criteria, explain why you decided to have the rules that you did to put something in one category or another. So specifying the rules, writing up your criteria, the steps and logic for your judgment allows the research to be replicated, to be done again, either at a later time or on similar media objects. And it might be, for example, that you can find an existing piece of research where they explain their criteria. You decide that their criteria make sense, and you use the same criteria on your media objects, and then you can compare your results to the results made in the other content analysis research. And these rules should mean that someone else could categorize in the same way as you. So someone you've never met should be able to get similar results, pretty close results, and your research could be described as replicable. You could replicate or copy the method and apply it in different circumstances. Another aspect of your criteria for coding, for categorizing the information, is that it should be valid. That seems very general idea, the idea something should be valid. But it's about allowing others to check that they're valid. And what does valid mean? It means they make sense, that they connect with the problem that you're asking about, and they're not biased. One problem with some research is you create a criteria that confirms your idea or prejudices. So if you say something is, if you're very pro-Brexit, for example, and the criteria that you have will generally show the articles to be anti-Brexit, if it's very easy for the articles to be anti-Brexit, maybe what's happening is you are trying to show the media is biased against you. Right? You've already got your prejudices that the media is anti-Brexit, and so the testing will give that result. So the validity, the explanation of why it's a valid set of criteria to check to answer the problem, answer the research question, allows someone to look at them and see if they can follow your logic and your argument. So getting the correct criteria, testing the validity through putting the reasons why you chose the way to code and the test that you did, is one guard against your testing being biased. And someone should read it, follow the logic, and in fact see that you are trying not to be biased, that you're trying to get an accurate result without inserting your prejudices, without either looking at the wrong thing or using the wrong rules to put something in criteria to make judgments. So, content analysis. Overall, there are 4 steps. There are a few sub-steps, but there are 4 main steps. The first one is selecting the media. The second one is devising categories. The third one is coding or categorising. And the 4th step is analysing. Step 1. Select your media. So, these must be relevant to the research question. What are you trying to understand? So the media products should connect with whether you're looking at left wing or right wing or establishment press or minority press or local media. You're looking at a story in the news, then one criteria would seem to be simple. The media products that you're looking at would cover that topic. The other idea about the type of media is maybe you're looking at different approaches by different media. A classic choice is one tabloid and one broadsheet newspaper. So, for example, the Sun and the Telegraph. or a left-right choice, the Guardian, the Telegraph. And you can see if the Guardian's approach is different to the Telegraph, if the left approach seems different to the right approach, or if a tabloid approach is different to a broadsheet approach. So this depends on the type of story and what exactly you're trying to understand. And of course, you've also got to make sure that the type of media that you're looking at is available to you. You can do a search for it. You can get a comprehensive list of articles. That's usually not that much of a problem. But some, for example, are behind firewalls. Things like the Financial Times, for example. Another aspect of choosing your media is if you're looking at a lot of information, you might use a technique called sampling. The sampling technique is when you've got a vast amount of data, but you haven't got time to cover everything. And so therefore you might only decide to have a certain percentage of the articles or items analysed. One way of doing it, say, is if you've got 1,000 articles, you might decide that number 1, number 5, number 9 in date order are the ones that you look at. So you only look at every 4th article. We're generally not going to be looking at that large amounts of data, so it's unlikely we're going to use a sampling technique. We're probably only going to look at a month or something like that, but this can be the case. This can be the case if we're looking at a lot of data. So we've selected our media. We've selected what we're going to look at. The next step is to devise the categories. And when you devise the categories, this is about when you code or put the items or articles into a category. So the first thing is the category should be exhaustive. Every item should be able to be put into a category. So for example, in our referendum, we'd need a mixed value or takes no side value or a predominantly no, as well as a yes and a no. As well as the basic yes and no, we'd have other things in there. So takes no side or mixed or predominantly no, or 50-50. The second thing when you're devising categories, it should be exclusive. So if you code to put an item in one category, it should only go in that category. You should be able to make a clear decision about which box, which category it should be going into, and it shouldn't also fit in another category. And then the last criteria, which is possibly, the most important, is that when you finish doing this, when you look at the numbers in these categories, that should tell us something about the media product. That should tell us something about the coverage that's interesting for us, that helps us understand the story, helps us answer the question that we're looking to answer. Now, categorising is not easy. You've got an overall theory, you've got a proposition. The content analyst should be able to test that theory or proposition, that idea, that question. But it's not straightforward. So you should talk to a tutor about your coding scheme, the way that you categorise. You should bring the theory, you should bring the coding scheme and the selection criteria and discuss it with your tutor. And the next thing you should consider doing is that you must test this. You must test your categories, your coding scheme, by coding a small amount of data to see whether or not this is exhaustive, this is exclusive, to work out what fits, what does not fit, and then as a result you would revise, change slightly your categories. Step 3, coding. So remember, your first attempt at coding will probably miss something, won't explain it. So do a test on a small amount of data and see what works and what doesn't work. You can code to a spreadsheet, or if it's a very small amount of data, just simply code on a piece of paper where you put numbers against a line. Now, here's this example of coding. We're not going to watch it here and now. It's about 5 minutes, but it's a very good example. And you'll see it pretty much from beginning to end, the coding mechanism. The last step is analysing. You'll do a simple analysis that looks at the average, the sums, the percentages. You should be able to do simple calculations on a spreadsheet. And as a result, you should be able to bring something out that relates to the ideas you are testing. So it might be, as you go through, you pick out certain articles to discuss in particular, examples of coding, or as an example of how this fits in with certain of your ideas. That might be part of your write-up. But you're also going to analyse the percentages, the different media, and often you're going to be asking several questions of the same data as you go through. You're going to be asking about bias, about the different reasons, the main reasons, the shorter reasons, why they think the referendum should be yes or whether they think it should be no. So they're the 4 steps of content analysis. Take time to look at the video and you should see a pretty interesting article in preparation.